was a drive way back. It might be. It could be. It is. Holy cow. Welcome to another broadcast of Bricks Behind the Ivy.
Hey, Cub fans! Welcome back to another episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy. I am your host, Mr. Jeff CandidCubs Ragauskis, and with me today, I have a very special guest, Mr. Jim Christopher. Jim, how you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. It's a beautiful summer Sunday, or summer day, and I get to be inside because it's Texas. So yay!
Yeah, I think it's been pretty hot at times this year in Chicago, almost similarly as hot in Texas, which has been surprising. The weather is so unpredictable in the Midwest, so I'm not trying to commiserate and think that I'm in Texas, but yeah.
When I was at the game, though, it was 10 degrees warmer in Chicago than it was here because we got some weird, air movement for 2 days, and it went down to 80. I was like, well, I don't know.
In my big boy job, I know some folks that work out in Texas, and we had been talking about that it was nearly 100 degrees in Chicago, and they just couldn't believe that it was warmer here than there. They're like, are you sure? Yeah. I'm like, no, I can read a thermometer. It's something I learned in school. But all jokes aside, so you recently got to attend a game at Wrigley Field for a very specific purpose. Do you want to give us some background on what you're doing this summer and what you have planned, and then we can kind of talk about your experience at Wrigley?
Yeah, so we had a podcast for about 5 years that was really all minor league podcast about just going to games and the game day experience called Let's Get To, and then we got approached by some folks, and now it's going to kind of move into being an official travel show. It'll be streaming on a network yet to be named called Ballpark Nation. And one of the cool things was because it's really geared toward maybe people who have never really gone to a baseball game ever and are curious about it, it meant that we got to introduce doing some major league stuff too. And so I used as an excuse to go to my first 2 Cub games, and that'll be our 5th or 6th episode of the season will be my ranking and breaking down of my Cub game experience. But yeah, the show will be out on YouTube and podcast right away as they're done. And then in 2 halves when they hit streaming, like a season 1 part 1 and a season 1 part 2. So pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's super cool. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, I feel like a lot of people who potentially listen to this podcast would describe that as the dream that you get to, kind of do something like this. So what got you into baseball? What was the bug that bit you that got you into this space?
If you can't see it, but up over my left-hand side, there is an actual authentic pennant from the 1986 National League West champion U.S. Houston Astros, which at the time was the thing. And I was 10 years old, and it's the first baseball season that I really remember, and also the thing that I remembered that most baseball seasons are defined by pain. But for some reason, I felt bonded to the city. I mean, I was going to the Astrodome. Pretty much, I feel like I was raised there. I was an Astros buddy. My grandfather, I was the only grandkid who would go. So I would probably go into 35, 40 games this summer. Before the 1994 strike, a bunch of my friends and I did skip school and went to the last game. So it's kind of a thing that's always been in my blood. Unfortunately, it never translated to being able to actually play the game with any degree of proficiency. But no, I mean, I was born and raised it. And again, I look at that pennant, and it's just this kind of touchstone to something that I've loved since I was a kid. And I jokingly tell my wife that the Astros were either my first or second love, and she's somewhere around 4th because, Star Wars. So, yeah, it's just always been part of me, man. I don't know. It's hard to really pin down a time.
Yeah, you got to work on that wife bit, because I sometimes slip up and say how much I love the Cubs, and then around my kids and my wife, I'm like, which is as much as you is usually how I end the sentence.
Totally.
Getting me to be quiet in our house is really hard, so run-on sentences aren't a surprise, and I can get away with it from time to time. Sorry, honey, if you're listening. But yeah, baseball always, I feel like, grabs people, and when they does grab them, it hooks them for life. It's one of those sports that, is indoctrinated in family experience, familial ties, which is interesting just thinking of how much that is a huge part of the Chicago Cubs culture. And you going to Wrigley for the first time, without spoiling too much of what's on your episode, I implore folks to check it out, check out the show. Such a cool concept. I can't wait to see it selfishly because I might be in it. But also, what were your takeaways from Wrigley Field and how it differs from other experiences you've had?
So first of all, let's talk familial. My all-time favorite cousin lives in Wrigleyville. This has been a thing she's been trying to get to have happen. So we're both in our 40s, late 40s. So you don't get to see your favorite cousin as much as you used to. So already that was was such a big part of it. We went to one of the bars in Wrigleyville beforehand, had a couple of drinks, and then we went to the ballpark. And Bridget, if you're listening, and we have the same grandfather that I'm talking about. So I remember I have this ritual and where I want to, and my wife will still have to blindfold me at the opening day at Minute Maid Park every year because I want to see the ballpark at the first time and all of it, like all of its glory. And I just remember walking up and seeing Wrigley for the first time. And what it was is I'd taken a tour that day. So it was still daytime Wrigley. It wasn't even like, and it was like Cubs picture day. So you got all these guys like sitting on bleachers in the middle of it was just so neat. But I remember thinking one of the few times in my life where it met expectations, where I had blown this thing up in my head of what it was going to look like and feel like, and it met that. And it wasn't one of those things where you sort of had to rationalize down. I think I'm one of those guys. I get romantic about baseball, and I think it really was just. It felt like magic. It felt like I was back 100 years ago, where it looked pretty much the same, and I was giddy, I guess is the best way to describe even just seeing it for the first time, and then getting to take the tour and learning all the history, and I had an amazing tour guide. So yeah, I just really kind of bought, and I was messaging you as we going, like I really kind of just bought into all of it pretty instantly, just based on those moments.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We had some prior conversations before you got to go, and something you said is just, it's funny and just how much it rings true for myself of like being like in like a time capsule. Like you've landed at this place that is 100 and some years old, and
yeah,
it still feels that way, but like not in a negative way. They've done such a good job of preserving what's special about that ballpark, what's old about that ballpark, while also like tap dancing a line of making modern amenities and stuff in the concourse. I like that, to me, is a magic trick. Like that is,
it was old without feeling old. It was old without being run down. And I've not been inside Fenway, but the exterior of Fenway, I get a very different vibe. I had a similar experience when I went to watch the Anaheim A's in the Big A, where of course it's a much newer ballpark, but still at this point now, you know, 60, 70 years old, but it didn't feel that old. And I felt the same way about Wrigley, where even though it was this icon that's over 100 years old, it didn't feel that way. I didn't feel like I was gonna get tetanus if I hit into a wall the wrong way. Or whatever. So it was clean, and the concourse area was as modernized as you could probably get in a ballpark that's that old, with really dynamic food choices and beverage choices and all that stuff. So it ended up making a perfect marriage of this classic thing that also still, by which you expect out of 2020 standards, met those as well.
Yeah, and that is a really difficult. I think in Chicago, the immediate example we think of when renovating something old to try to make it, a little more future-proof is Soldier Field, and I don't think you would hear anyone in Chicago describe that as being something that went well, because there was a lot of jokes that it, like when you drive on Lakeshore Drive, it looks like a spaceship landed on top of an old building, and I don't think that's any way anyone has ever wanted architecture to be described that they've designed is that there's such a juxtaposition in styles that they don't look like they belong together. And
Yeah, I've seen pictures of it, of course.
Yeah,
And now the Bears are getting a new stadium anyway as a result of that. Is that
yeah,
happening?
we'll see where as everyone fights over who's paying for it and how much of a tax break the organization will get. But that's for a financial podcast and a Bears podcast. So
it was someone smarter than me as a guest.
So if you had to pick something in Wrigley Field that was like your favorite feeling or favorite experience, favorite thing, could you pick one thing, and what would that be?
I couldn't pick one thing, and also I think that what I'll do is start with something that's probably relatively standard, and that was getting to sing "Go Cubs Go" at the end, where it was again like being at a college football game where you sing the eyes of Texas when you're done, and you don't have that at professional sports very often. And I just thought, everybody stayed to the end. It was a Tuesday night game. There was like 35,000 people in the park singing this song. And it was, again, one of those moments. I also had, I don't know if you see it was the opportunity or not, but sort of fortune, I guess, or just the happenstance of being there while they played the Giants when the death of Willie Mays was announced. And
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and I can't imagine being in a better spot because they did a moment of silence and it was silent. And then the next inning, they played the Say Hey song, and now you've got 35,000 Cub fans singing that song. And I don't know, it was just something about it that there are fan bases that get credit for being good baseball fan bases, the Cubs, I think the Cardinals as well. And I think they definitely backed that up by taking some time to appreciate a whole other fan base that was technically on the other side of the diamond from them. And I think it's definitely going to be something that's going to be in my memory for the rest of my life, of being there in that moment with a great baseball group, honoring this guy playing the team that he used to play for. So it was one of those real surreal moments.
Yeah, I think it needs to be noted, if you are not watching this podcast on YouTube, I did give the obligatory stank face when he said Cardinals. I need to keep up my notoriety in the Cubs streets. But it is,
hey,
it
man,
really
I
is.
feel you. Don't you worry about it.
It is a really great baseball place. And I feel like that's a place I go to where you see more fans than other places, like using scorecards and like, still like have transistor radios like on their pocket and like in their ear, or even as that is modernized, you'll see people with their like clearly with the MLB app and something like an ear pod and that and you're hearing Pat and Ron, and because like that's their immersion, that's their process, and it's a familial experience. But then I always feel like there's this feeling of like everyone there is on this mission to capture like their joy, and like they have like a process, and like sometimes the Cub fan that's in there, their process is like making every other Cub fan feel like they're welcome, and other Cub fans are a little more alienated, but like they're not there to bother anyone, and they're so dialed into the game you just can't help but admire. And there's so many Cub like bleacher personalities and fan personalities like Captain Cubbo and some other folks that I've gotten to interact with, and Crawley, and it is a really unique fan base that, I'm really glad to be a part of. And it's cool to hear, like, from an outsider's perspective, like these things like carry through. And it's nice to feel like we might be able to shake the everyone at Wrigley Field cheers too hard for a fly ball mantra that I feel like we get on television. Because I think that's every fan base. Every fan base.
And half of it's wishful. It's like Carlton Fisk. We're all trying to
correct. Yeah. Yeah, we're all that windy day at Wrigley Field trying to give it an extra 15 to 16 feet.
Totally. Yeah.
So before we go, I do want to ask a question about the Astros specifically, and
sure.
we can cut this out. I think like there was a very challenging moment as a fan, and I think there's been challenging moments recently for Cub fans as like the World Series team has left. And I think a challenging moment for the Astros fan base could be some of the scandal tied around one of the teams, and then World Series that have happened subsequently. What was that like tackling as a fan? I think that there's, I try to take a level of empathy in these situations and feel like that if something like that were to have happened on the Cubs, I don't know how I would have processed it, because the answer wouldn't have been, I'm done with this team. Like, because I'm not, look, I would have to sell my house. Like, I don't know.
No, I mean, like, look, and it's funny because right now the thing bounding around Astros fans is, well, there was a rumor about Trevor Bauer, and I do a really popular Astros podcast, and we all decided that might have been a bridge too far as that goes. The scandal, it was a weird progression of feelings. At first, like, so Astros fans, first of all, have a conspiracy theory that the Astros are always, because we're not an important team, will be the ones that sort of will get knocked around. And I remember one year they had a hurricane and we had to play the Cubs for playoff position, and Bud Selig picked the neutral ground of Milwaukee.
Yeah, where Carlos Zambrano threw that no-hitter. Like, in
so it's like
very, very weird moment.
So for me, the beginning of it was embarrassment, irritation, but also kind of like, I just thought this was a thing that happened. And then I think what made me become us against the world guy was the Altuve stuff, which was proved wrong a zillion times about the buzzer, and people running with that. And then also just the indignance of fans who also had teams with skeletons in the closet. And so for me, it was like, I don't feel like we had an honest conversation about it. I mean, there were, the Baseball Prospectus wrote an article about, probably it actually didn't even help them win games because of teams had figured it out. And, then we talked about Aroldis Chapman never blows games. Like, they were talking about the 19 thing again. And then until he blew the 20 game as well. Right. Like, yeah. So it's clearly a thing that I wish hadn't happened. It's clearly a thing that, AJ Hinch lost his job for it, because I think, I'm former military, so I understand what it's like to grow as a leader. And I don't know that AJ Hinch in 2019 puts up with it the way he does in 17, because I do think you grow and process and mature. But then there's also the Joe Girardi starting on MLB Network saying we were part of a system that is stopping the talk. So you always hear it from Yankee fan and Dodger fan, and it's almost like those are two teams MLB's never going to touch. So of course they're never going to face the same repercussions. And I think the real big repercussion that we're seeing is now we have an owner who's really, really involved, because he was really embarrassed by the whole thing, and he blames, I think to some degree, he's like, it only happened because I let a GM run the team without me being involved. And that was Jeff Luhnow, who's kind of known to be kind of a jerk anyway. Like, nobody really liked him in baseball. So it's a bunch of things, but also too, it's the World Series that was won after our city survived a hurricane. It was a month in which October 1st, there was a grandchild born, and then ended with a World Series title in the same month. Like, so there are going to be certain emotional things that I'm going to think about. I will respect everybody's opinion about it. Particularly hardcore baseball fans. I don't necessarily get into the whataboutisms. Bobby Thompson's home run now was seen as being also the process of an electronically stolen sign, like all that stuff. It happened. It's just another chapter in baseball history where baseball is so hard that you feel like you've got to go against the rules to win. So I understand why people are upset about it. I understand why people are still upset about it. I think we can probably put aside that the team wouldn't have won regardless, because we've seen what that team has done since. 7 straight LCSs, another World Series title. So it's definitely complicated. I'm not afraid to talk about it. And I definitely, again, I have empathy for how other people might feel about it.
I think, first of all, thank you so much for answering that. I think it's a really challenging situation. And even while you were talking, I thought of the skeletons in the Cubs closet, with Sammy Sosa's corked bat and how long that was a thing. And, the steroid use by Sammy Sosa, and like just, the reluctance of accepting him back into the picture for the Cubs.
And I hate to cut you off, but steroids is the perfect example. It
is. That's where I was going. Yeah. It's like
baseball let them get away with it until they didn't.
Correct. And that's like we have like this whole culture in baseball of like these scapegoats of this era, but like they filled the seats after the strike. They knew what was going on, like the biogenesis report, all those things. It was like every player, every single damn one. So like then by that regard, it makes the numbers of some of those guys so much more impressive because they were outpacing the other cheaters, if you want to label them as that. Like Barry Bonds' weighted runs created plus in the cheating era was still like 290. Like he was 290% better.
He was the best player in baseball before he decided that
Correct.
home runs were what he needed to do. So, totally.
It's an interesting conversation.
Well, it completely is. I mean, if you like, I'm a big Jeff Bagwell fan, but if you go read the injury history he had at the end of that time, that reeks of being, muscle and tendons tearing away from bone. That's a steroid injury. Like whether they want to admit it or not.
It's frustrating. I think especially as a baseball fan that like there are like generations of baseball fans that seem to like adjudicate or get to dictate, how the history is presented or how we interpret certain things. And, I try to, step back and look at this in the lens of fairness and then, not trying to be a conspiracy theory type person or those, but like, you look at the situation like with Shohei Ohtani this year and like how quickly that felt like that was wrapped up. And it's obviously there was a lot of fact around it being fraud and things, but it did also feel like in the way it was managed that if it was a different player, it would have been managed differently. And like, it's hard not to feel like that, that conspiracy thing that can come in the echo chambers of the modern day internet in those situations. And also I think, to me, there's a lot of tea leaves in you didn't negate the championship. So to me, I feel like there's more information they found when they looked into the World Series championship and whatever was going on with the Astros that it sounded like the Red Sox had a system with Apple Watches at one point. It sounds like
it was
other
one
teams,
intern though.
Yeah, like it just feels like it was a broader accepted thing, and maybe this was like someone who got more visually caught. Or like it took it like a half a step farther than every other organization in the sport. Yeah. And it is very weird. And I would like to take just a moment of like to preach at my own audience of like, be careful like when you immediately want to adjudicate something in baseball or anything, because, there are facts to stories and there are, processes, and always try to take a second to look like, what if it were the Cubs? Like, what do you do? And to me, I feel like that has been one of the more interesting questions on my mind since that happened of like, I'd still be here. We'd move on and I'd still be like, there's still White Sox fans, even though after the Black Sox for hundreds of years ago, that was very much proven, like not like a little mistake, like a pretty big mistake. So it's an interesting moment. I appreciate the camera there.
And this is in the weeds, but baseball has a financial model problem that they need the Yankees and Dodgers to be good.
Yes.
The NFL doesn't care who makes the Super Bowl because they are a league. Baseball is 2 teams and 28 others. And so there's a reason why they did throw a guy out this year for gambling. But you're right. The Shohei Ohtani thing was nothing to see here as quick as humanly possible. So I just take it all with stride. I've never, I've actually seen beauty out of all of this. And this will be my last story about it. But, my grandson has come to love the Astros, and they live in the Pacific Northwest. He's got his Astros hat on. He's 2 years old, 3 years old, and some guy comes up and boos in his face. Well, I am talking about it on my show. I've got a fan of the show who's a Dodger fan, and he's like, "Hey, I have a bunch of Astro stuff. I want to send it to your grandson because nobody deserves that." And I think that like everything else, Twitter is not real life, and I think most people are human and can relate the way you're saying the question is. What if it was your squad, your family, or whatever it is? Like, you don't bail on them. So that's where we are.
No, and that's I have similar experiences growing up in the South Side of Chicago, wearing a Cubs hat, and people throwing drinks at me as I walk to the gas station to get a Slurpee. That has happened to me. Yeah, exactly. So it's not like fandoms react a certain way, but like you really need to come down to the human element of like we're all just trying to be people enjoying the thing that we enjoy, and like we're not a reflection of the choices of an adult, and we don't even have all the information. So like, take a step back, calm yourself, and move on. Like that's all you can do. And baseball is a very interesting sport. And I think you said something that is a great topic for another episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy, of the 2 teams in baseball and the 28 others, and how come the Cubs have decided not to be the 3rd team in that tier, given them being in one of the markets that has a huge television market and their ability to capture that spot and a lack of interest in doing so. And that's an excellent transition into, Jim, what is going on with Ballpark Nation? Where can people check this out, and when can they check it out?
Okay, so our first couple episodes are up now, and by the time this episode drops, I think the Cubs episode will either be the week of or week after. So the way we're doing it is everything's going to exist on YouTube and as an Apple podcast. And then when the first half of the first season is done, that's going to move to streaming. And I'm not being coy about not knowing which network. It's a thing that's out of my hands. And then once it goes streaming, it has to come off of YouTube, and then it'll live on that streaming network. So if you want to watch it now, you can. And if you want to wait, we can give you guys an update on when and exactly which platform. It could be anything from Amazon and Netflix to Tubi to, I don't know, who knows? There's a million of them. It'll be somewhere else besides just YouTube.
Well, I'm super excited to see it. And, if you want to see more of your boy, Candid Cubs, I should be a part of the Cubs episode. And thanks so much for taking some time and kind of introducing the program and talking some Cubs and some Astros with us. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Anytime. And I love the show. And I was really glad to, I fell in love, man. I bought 3 Wrigley shirts. So there you go.
Well, you've got a long way to go until you have 47 Cubs hats and 18 Cub jerseys, but we'll get you there. I'm
not going to go count Astros. I'll let you know how it is.
Well, this has been another episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy. As always, I'm your host, Jeff Candid Cubs Ragauskis. We will see you, as always, next Friday. Until then, go Cubs.
Go Cubs.